Hello, and welcome to Mastering Environment Creation in Houdini and Arnold. Now, I'll start by saying a huge thanks to everyone who's signed up so far. We've been working hard to put together these in-depth training tutorials on everything that you need to know inside Houdini to create these realistic landscape environments. And over the course of the next 8 weeks, we aim to make sure that you're ready to build whatever your imagination can conjure up. As a heads up, this course does require prior knowledge of Houdini and at least a reasonable understanding of the terminology. However, I will be explaining as much as possible as we go. Now, Rebelway does offer an introduction to Houdini workshop that you might like to use or might like to take before embarking on this one if you're new to Houdini. At the end of the next 8 weeks, we'll have learned everything that we need to create these vast sweeping landscapes, both technically and artistically, the latter being a little bit trickier to grasp. Now, every week we will cover 1 or 2 new subjects. Each new subject will be accompanied by an introduction to the concept, some in-depth tutorials to teach you everything you need to know, and assignments to help you to really get to grips with it. So that's all I wanted to mention briefly about as an introduction to the course. And next I just wanted to talk a little bit about me and who I am. So my name's James Hodgehart and I'll be your instructor throughout this course. Now, I've been working in the industry for 6 years and have used Houdini as my primary software for 95% of that time. I'm currently at Access Studios in Glasgow, where Houdini is the main package of choice, and I have been working there as an environment lead for 2 years. Previous to that, I was a generalist for a few years, working in both assets and lighting. Luckily, in that time, and I say luckily because it is, I've had the privilege of working on some great pieces for Sony, Microsoft, Riot, Tencent, Blizzard, BBC, and some stuff for Channel 4. In a range of different styles, both very heavily stylized and heavily realistic too. But at the root of both of these very different styles are the same workflows and techniques that I use every day. And it's those that we'll cover as we move on throughout this course. So that's enough of this. Let's take a look at what we'll be doing week by week. So I'll just pop over to the Mastering Environments page on the Rebelway website. Scroll down. So, week 1, an introduction to environment art. So we'll start with a general overview of the project, and that's essentially what we're doing here. But afterwards, we will move into art, colours and composition, how best to tackle a large-scale environment, how to analyse real reference and closely reproduce it, some visual storytelling techniques, understanding what it is we need to achieve, the best tools available, and the best workflow to use. Finally, for week 1, we'll look at Houdini proceduralism, including universal scene description and how everything fits together. Now, we may or may not do that in week 1, but we will definitely get to that, at some point over the next 8 weeks. So the only even remotely confusing part of week 1 is maybe the visual storytelling, and that's just because it's so concept heavy. It will be very wordy, so please stick with me. As you've already noticed, I have a thick Scottish accent that can be at times, and I apologise in advance if it is, a little difficult to understand. Please give me feedback and I will do my best to mitigate that. So moving on to week 2, we'll be looking at advanced terrain generation, and this is for the large shot. So we'll start with an in-depth look at the height fields and what's available in Houdini 18. This includes the rivers and the erosion, the layering procedural details using Houdini SOPs, some texture generation and advanced masking, and then we'll create the large-scale terrain with all the details that we need to move forward. In week 3, we'll start with a visual study of plants and trees and all the elements that we need to build what we saw in that image. Now, this includes an introduction to SpeedTree, and we say introduction because it's a very complex program. It's an amazing program, very complex, and it would take 8 weeks of tutorials just to teach the ins and outs of SpeedTree. But what we will do is make sure that you have everything that you need to create what we plan to create in this course. So we'll go through it and we'll create the various trees, all the bushes and the plants, and we will also try and create some stuff in Houdini as an alternative to SpeedTree. Now, it does say R&D only because this is more for exploration, and we may or may not achieve the same results from SpeedTree as we do in Houdini, but we will definitely at least learn a lot as we go. In week 4, we'll look at scene assembly and some mask generation techniques. So scene assembly is the part of the pipeline, if you're unfamiliar, where we take all the assets that have been created from all the different departments or sourced from all the different locations, and we bring them together and make them work as a scene, matching colour scripts or direction from the art director or the director. And admittedly, it's the most fun part for me. So we'll start with scene assembly. Mask generation techniques, pretty self-explanatory as to what that is, but we'll definitely cover it in depth as we go. Procedural and efficient scattering setup using Houdini and Arnold or other alternative renderers. So in this case, it will probably be Mantra we might take a little look at. Yep, Mantra. Afterwards, we'll look at basic lighting, and this will just be simple shot lighting just to make sure that we can read the environment and what we have made up until this point. After that, we'll be shading and rendering the large scale terrain. So moving on to week 5, we'll be shading and texturing the trees and bushes that we made previously. We'll be prepping extra assets to enrich the environment, which will be heavily reliant on Megascans. Now, Megascans is incredible, a vast library of photogrammetry, and it's also affordably priced in my opinion. So up until, I don't know, I think it was a month or 2 ago, it was a little bit more expensive, but they have since lowered their price and upped the points. So I think it's 90 points or so that you get now, which is more than enough to cover everything we need for this course. So please go ahead and get yourself a Megascans account. Afterwards, we'll be looking at advanced lighting and refining the various visual aspects of the shot, and then how to set up the AOVs necessary to get the flexibility needed in comp. This will also cover optimization of the ROPs and how to get the best result for the lowest amount of time. Moving on to week 6, we'll have the introduction to volume and manipulation in Houdini, volumetrics and cloud creation, shading and lighting, rendering the clouds and atmospherics, reviewing all the passes and prepping the data for comp, initial compositing in Fusion, and initial compositing using Nuke. So the other more colloquial term for initial compositing is a slap comp, where we essentially just bring in the render passes, we quickly merge them all together in the right order so we can review what it looks like in the end before we get too far. Week 7, we'll refine the comp and the tweaking. We will start lighting the animation in comp. We'll add all the necessary tweaks to make the shot feel believable, enhance the visual by adding 3D elements in comp, and this workshop will be covered in Nuke and Fusion. So I'll be covering Fusion on my part, and we'll have another artist, Saber Jalassi, looking at it in Nuke. So just to quickly talk a little bit about comp, if you're not familiar with comp compositing in these packages, it can, at first glance, look very complicated. And if you're used to node-based, asset creation or working in a node-based way, you'll know that it's a little bit misleading because all these nodes are sometimes doing very little. So at first glance, when everything looks like a spaghetti junction, there's nodes everywhere and it looks very complicated, most of the time, half those nodes are doing very, very simple things. But we'll go through and we'll We'll talk about the logic behind some of these choices as we go. We'll also try and introduce some of the real world techniques and camera artifacts to make our shots look a little bit more believable. Yep, and that's everything we'll cover in week 7. So moving on to week 8, we'll take a look at the universal scene description, karma, and Arnold. Again, this is just to give us an in-depth overview of the USD and Lops in Houdini, and a complete overview of how to use Solaris to recreate the shot and render it using Karma or any other available USD delegate. So for the most part, that's everything I wanted to talk about here. And we have a lot of information to cover and a lot of ground to cover. So let's begin. Now the first piece of ground that we'll look at is art, colours and composition. And that will be the next video. So thank you, and I hope you're as excited as I am to get started.